If I'm being honest, I'm excited to see what happens with the new rules that are being brought down from the National Association of Realtors. You see, they settled on a case. And this case was set forth because they did not think that buyers' agents should be getting paid out of the seller's side of the contract. So when we list a home, it's usually 6 or 7% or 5%, whatever that percentage is. You usually split it with the buying agent. The problem is you can't have a contract with commissions to pay a third party not knowing who that third party is going to be. And that's kind of the way real estate market is set up that way. For me, it is a very positive thing for buyers, because if a buyer wants representation today, the way it's set up and the way it was set up yesterday, they can go meet with a realtor and look at houses and not worry about having to write a check for representation, because it can all come out of the seller's proceeds, because the seller is the one contracted to pay the realtor the commission, even though they don't know them and never had a contract with that person. That's the way it's been set up. And I think that was a good thing, but it goes against some of the rules that are out there with different laws and whatever. So they're going to X that. No longer are you going to be paying commission as a seller. You're only going to be paying your agent. That's it. So if it's a 6% commission, now you're paying a 3% commission, and the buyer can fend for themselves. Now, where that might go wrong for the buyers, it's going to be very difficult for buyers to not just come up with a down payment, but they're also going to have to come up with commission to pay for representation. So it's no longer really be called commission, it'd be called a buyer representation fee. The issue with that is, when you go to get a loan for a house, the maximum you can get back from the seller is 3%. So you can't just tack that money onto the purchase price. Well, you can, but then you're not going to get closing costs paid for. So if you go and you write an offer, you say, I want $2,500 in closing costs paid for by the seller, and I want the seller to pay 3% to my agent for their fee. It isn't going to work. Banks aren't going to allow it, not going to appraise, it will not work. So now whoever goes out to have buyer representation is going to have to write a check. A lot of people are going to say, I'm not going to write a check for 3%, forget that noise, or even 2%. So that number is probably going to end up being negotiated. I know if I sell for sale by owner and the for sale by owner says, nope, we're not paying you, then I have to go to my client and say, hey, look, I don't want to get in the way of you buying this house. You pay me what you feel I'm worth. And typically, they're going to write me a check for that 3%. That's the way it's been for me. I've been extremely lucky. But a lot of buyers aren't going to be able to do that. And so what are they going to do? They're going to go directly to the listing agent, which means they're going to be represented by the person who cares more about the seller than them, because that's the only person that they really know. So they're going to have an issue there. Are they going to be able to trust that person? Are they going to get as good of a deal? How are you going to negotiate for yourself? It's very difficult. So that's going to be a big issue that the buyers are going to have. First off, they're going to have to write a check, and if they can't, they're going to go straight to the listing agent, which means they're going to be in dual agency with someone they don't know, which means they're going to represent the seller before they represent your needs. And that's kind of a scary thing for a lot of buyers. I know that when I'm out helping a buyer, I can see in their eyes when they're talking to me, not every single buyer is like this, but I can see in their eyes when their hands are in the air, they're like, I am at your mercy because I trust you, you know about this market, and I need your advice. I can see it in their eyes that they're depending on me to give them solid advice for a massive financial decision that they need to make. And so it is going to be a very difficult thing for a lot of buyers to handle. It's going to be extremely difficult. And I also know that when I go and talk to a for sale by owner, for example, I just listed one that was a for sale by owner, great friend of mine, he's a banker, he's done this, he knows how to do this, I know how to sell homes. The problem is they never gave him true feedback. He said, well, we really haven't had any bad feedback. Well, it's not always bad, it's constructive. And it is a lot harder for someone to tell the owner the constructive feedback. So working directly with the seller or working directly with the agent that represents the seller is going to be very difficult for that buyer. And they're not going to be able to give them the feedback that they need to price a home properly. And it might just sit for sale for a long time. The other side of it is when you got half the commission, are the values of homes going to drop? Because immediately, who's going to get that, right? So normally you pay, say, 6%, 3% goes to the buyer's agent. Well, they don't have to pay that anymore, so you should come down on the price 3%. Seller says, well, I want to capture that 3%. Who's going to get it? Who's going to get it? We don't know. Probably the buyer. because the buyers are the ones that determine the value of the house because they're the ones writing the offer. A seller can tell you, I want this for the house. Does not matter until the buyer agrees to pay it. When the buyer agrees to pay it, that's when it matters. So it's very complex. We don't really know what's going on with this whole thing. I'm excited to see what happens, and I'm not worried about my business because I've been listing strong and I've been in the business a long time and I feel very comfortable with what's going to come.